The Theory of Credit by Henry Dunning MacLeod, in 2 volumes, Volume 1, 1889. Chapter 1, Credit, Definition of Terms. Economics is the science of exchanges, or that which treats of the scientific principles and mechanism of commerce in its widest extent and in all its forms and varieties. The word economics is compounded of the Greek words ekos and vamos. Ekos in Greek means property of every sort and description. Throughout the whole range of Greek literature from Homer to Ammonius, the word ekos is used as absolutely synonymous with 2 other Greek words I can't pronounce to denote wealth of every sort. It is the technical term in Attic law for a person's whole substance or estate of every form. It includes not only such property as lands, houses, money, jewelry, corn, cattle, and such property of a material form, but also such property as consists only in the form of abstract rights, such as rights of action, debts, banknotes, bills of exchanges, the funds, shares in commercial companies, the goodwill of a business, copyrights, patents, and many other kinds of abstract rights, which are termed in law incorporeal wealth. Nomics in Greek means a law. Hence, economics is a science which treats of the exchanges of all the different species of property which constitute commerce. Hence, it may be defined as the science which treats of the laws which govern the relations of exchangeable quantities, or the principles or mechanism of commerce in all its forms. It is also sometimes called the theory of value, or the science of wealth, definition of wealth, or of an economic quantity. 2. Next, after clearly explaining the nature and purpose of a science, it is necessary to define clearly all the technical terms used in it. In almost every science, a considerable number of the definitions are taken from words of common discourse which have a variety of meanings. But in a formal scientific treatise, it is indispensably necessary to select one out of these diverse meanings as suitable for the particular science, and to use it uniformly in that sense throughout the work. Nor is it sufficient to enumerate a number of isolated objects under a definition. As pointed out by Bacon long ago, a scientific definition essentially requires some principle or quality, which is common to all the objects enumerated. It is not sufficient to allege that lands, houses, jewelry, money, cattle, labor, and services, debts, rights of action, the funds, shares in commercial companies, etc., are wealth, without clearly defining the quality or principle which is common to them all, and which constitutes the essence of wealth. This is what Whewell calls the Collegation of Facts. It is also a principle in framing definitions that, when once the quality or principle is agreed upon, which is the basis of the science, all quantities which have that quality in common must be included in the definition, however diverse may be their forms and natures, and even though they possess no other quality in common except that single one. What then is the common quality or principle which constitutes things' wealth? The meaning of the word wealth has been the subject of controversy for centuries, and in considering this important question, it appears to us that, upon the whole, the best way would be to explain the meaning of the terms as used by the economists who founded economics as a science, and then to consider how far it is consistent with the scientific principles of framing definitions, and how far preceding and subsequent writers have differed from it. Definition of wealth by the economists. The economists defined wealth, richesse, to be the material products of the earth, which are brought into commerce and exchanged, and those only. Thus, Badiou says, useful and agreeable objects proper for our enjoyment are called biens, goods, because they conduce to the preservation, the propagation, and the well-being of the human race. The products which the producers consume themselves, the economists termed biens. But sometimes these biens goods are not richesse, wealth, because they cannot be exchanged for other goods or to be used to procure other enjoyments. The products of nature or the works of art, the most necessary or the most agreeable, cease to be wealth, richesse, when you lose the power of exchanging them and or procuring other enjoyments by means of this exchange. 100,000 feet of the most beautiful oak in the world would not be wealth recessed to you in the interior of North America, where you could not divest yourself of its possession by means of an exchange. The title of wealth recessed therefore supposes two things. First, useful qualities, which render the objects useful and agreeable, and fit for enjoyment, which renders them biens, goods. Secondly, the possibility of exchanging them, which enables these biens, goods, to procure you others, which constitutes them richesse, wealth. The possibility of exchange supposes that there are other goods for which they can be exchanged. So, Quesnay says, we must distinguish between biens, goods, which have value in use, and not value in exchange, and richesse or wealth, which has both value in use and value in exchange. For instance, the savages in Louisiana enjoy many biens, such as wood, game, the fruits of the earth, etc., which are not richesse, wealth, because they have no value in exchange. But since some kinds of commerce have to be established between them and the French, the English, the Spaniards, etc., part of these biens have acquired a value in exchange and have become richesse, wealth. So also, Latrosny says, man is surrounded by wants which are renewed every day. Whatever they are, it is only from the earth they can draw the means of supplying them. The physical truth that the earth is the source of all biens is so self-evident that no one can doubt it. But it is not sufficient to estimate products by their useful qualities. We must consider the properties they have of being exchanged against each other. Products acquire, therefore, in a state of society a new quality, which springs from the communication of men with each other. This quality of value, which makes products become richesse, wealth, and so there is nothing superfluous, because the excess becomes the means to obtain what one wants. Value consists in the relation of exchange, which exists between such and such products. In a word, the quality of richesse supposes not only a useful property, but also the possibility of exchange, because value is nothing but the relation of exchange. The earth, in truth, only gives products which have the physical qualities to satisfy our wants. It is exchange which gives them value, the quality relative and accidental. But as it is the products themselves which are the sole matters of exchange, it follows that we may say with truth that it is the earth which produces not only biens, but all wealth. Now we observe that it is true that man has constant wants, but it is not true that it is the earth only which supplies the means to satisfy them. Man has not only physical wants, but has mental wants. He constantly wants services of different kinds, the services of advocates, physicians, surgeons, and many others. And he pays for them just as he pays for the physical substances which minister to his physical wants. Consequently, the earth is not the source of all that ministers to the wants of man. However, the definition of wealth by the economists was perfectly clear. It was the material products of the earth which are brought into commerce and exchanged, and those only. Thus, the economists made exchangeability the real essence of wealth, but they restricted it onto exchangeable material products. But as a matter of fact, there are other things which can be bought and sold or exchanged besides material products. Thus, labor or services can be bought and sold, and also abstract rights, such as credits or debts, banknotes, bills of exchange, shares in commercial companies, and many other kinds can be bought and sold and possess the quality of exchangeability. Nevertheless, the economists steadfastly refused to admit that labor and credit are wealth, because they alleged that to admit labor and credit to be wealth would be to maintain that wealth can be created out of nothing. They repeated a multitude of times that man can create nothing, and that nothing can come out of nothing. Ex nihilo nihil fit. Seeing then that the economists admitted that exchangeability is the real essence of wealth, and that other quantities besides material ones possess the quality of exchangeability, it is necessary to inquire whether it is consonant to the laws of natural philosophy and the doctrine of other economists, both ancient and modern, and or to include labor and credit from the term wealth, and to restrict it exclusively to material products. It is also necessary to see what reply can be given to the dogma that man can create nothing, and that ex nihilo nihil vel. Aristotle's definition of wealth. Ancient writers for 1300 years unanimously held that exchangeability, or the capability of being bought and sold, is the sole essence and principle of wealth, and that everything, whatever, which can be bought and sold or exchanged is wealth, whatever its nature or its form may be. Thus Aristotle says, Nicomac, eth BV, and we call wealth all things whose value can be measured in money. So the eminent Roman jurist Ulpian says, for that is wealth which can be bought and sold. All of the most eminent modern economists have come to agree in this definition. Thus Mill says, everything therefore forms a part of wealth which has a power of purchasing. Here we have a perfectly good general concept or definition which contains only one general idea. And it is therefore fitted to form the basis of a great science. It is a concept as wide and general as the dynamical definition of force. That single sentence of Aristotle is the germ out of which the whole science of economics is to be evolved, just as the huge oak tree is developed out of a tiny acorn. A quantity means anything which can be measured. Hence, an economic quantity means anything whose value can be measured in money. The sole criterion, then, of anything being wealth is, can it be bought and sold? Can it be exchanged separately and independently of anything else? Can its value be measured in money? This criterion may seem very simple, but in fact, to apply it properly, to discern what can be bought and sold independently of anything else, and all the things whose value can be measured in money, requires a thorough knowledge of some of the most abstruse branches of law and commerce. On the three species of wealth, or of economic quantities. Having then adopted exchangeability, or the capability of being bought and sold, as the sole essence and principle of wealth, we have next to discover how many different orders or species of quantities there are which satisfy this definition. First, there are material things of all sorts, such as lands, houses, money, jewelry, corn, etc., which can be bought and sold, or whose value can be measured in money. Everyone now admits all these things to be wealth, and therefore we need say nothing more about them here. There are, however, two other orders of quantities which can be bought and sold, or whose value can be measured in money. And in modern times, there has been a vast amount of controversy as to whether they should be admitted to be wealth or not. And it is these species of quantities which we now have to consider. Ancient dialogue to show that personal qualities are wealth. There is a very remarkable work of antiquity extant, which is the earliest treatise that we are aware of on an economical question. It is a dialogue called the Euxaxius, or on wealth, and is frequently bound up with the works of Plato. It is attributed to Aeschines Socraticus, one of the most distinguished disciples of Socrates. Critics, however, unanimously pronounce it to be spurious, without being able to attribute it to any definite author. High authorities consider that it was properly written in the early Peripatetic period. The dialogue is to the following effect. The Syracusans had sent an embassy to Athens, and the Athenians had sent a return embassy to Syracuse. As the ambassadors were entering the city on their return, they met Socrates and a party of his friends, whom they entered into conversation. Aristarchus, one of the envoys, said that he had seen the richest man in all Sicily. Socrates immediately started a discussion on the nature of wealth. Aristotle said that he thought upon the subject as everyone else did, and that to be wealthy meant to have much money. Socrates asked him what kind of money he meant, and he instanced money of several countries. At Carthage, they used as money leather discs in which something was sewn up, but no one knew what it was. And he who possessed the greatest quantity of this money at Carthage was the richest man there. But at Athens, he would be no richer than if he possessed so many pebbles from the hill. At Lacedaemon, they used iron as money, and that useless iron. He who possessed a great quantity of this iron, there would be wealthy. But anywhere else, it would be worth nothing. In Ethiopia, again, they used carved pebbles as money, which were of no use anywhere else. Among the nomad Scythians, a house was not wealth, because no one wanted a house, but greatly preferred a good sheepskin cloak. He showed that if anyone could live without meat and drink, they would not be wealth to him, because he did not want them. Socrates showed that money is only wealth because it is exchangeable, because it can purchase other things. Where it is not exchangeable, where it cannot purchase other things, it is not wealth. He then asked why some things are wealth and other things not wealth. Why are some things wealth in some places and not other places? He showed that whether a thing is wealth or not depends entirely upon human wants and desires, that everything is wealth which is wanted and demanded, that things are wealth only when and where they are. That is, when and where they are wanted and demanded. Thus, we see that though some persons might be puzzled at the meaning of the word wealth, there is no possibility of mistake when we refer to the Greek, because, and insert Greek word, which is one of the most usual words in Greek for wealth, comes from, insert Greek word, to want or demand. Consequently, the word, insert Greek word, wealth means simply anything, whatever, which is wanted and demanded, no matter what its nature or its form may be. It is then human wants and desires which alone constitutes anything wealth. Anything, whatever which persons want and demand and are willing to pay for. Everything, therefore, which can be bought and sold is wealth, whatever its nature or its form may be. And anything which no one wants or demands is not wealth. Socrates then showed that gold and silver are only wealth insofar as they enable us to obtain or purchase what we want and demand, and that if anything else will enable us to purchase what we want and demand in the same way that money does, it is wealth for the very same reason that gold and silver are. Socrates then instanced persons who gained their living by giving instruction in the various sciences. He said that persons were able to purchase what they wanted by giving this instruction, just as they were able to do so with gold and silver. Consequently, he said that the sciences are wealth, and that those who are masters of such sciences are so much the wealthier. Now, in instancing the sciences as wealth, that is, of course, a general term for labor, because labor in economics is any exertion of human ability or thought which is wanted, demanded, and paid for. Thus, the author of this dialogue showed that labor is wealth. Socrates shows that the mind has wants and demands as well as the body, and that the things which are wanted and demanded for the mind and are paid for are equally wealth as those things which satisfy the wants and demands of the body and are paid for. Thus, each of the great professions, law, physics, surgery, engineering, etc., are great estates which produce utilities, which are as much wealth as the utilities which satisfy the wants of the body. Now, labor cannot be seen or handled. It cannot be transferred by manual delivery, but its value can be measured in money, and therefore it satisfies Aristotle's definition of wealth. If any person wants another to do any labor or science for him, and pays him for it, its value is measured in money as exactly as it were a material chattel. Suppose that a person gives 50 guineas for a watch or a horse, and also 50 guineas for the opinion of an eminent advocate. The value of the opinion is measured in money as exactly as that of the horse or the watch, and therefore they are all equally wealth. So if a person earns an income of some thousands a year as the manager of a great mercantile company, banking, insurance, railway, or other, his services are as much wealth to him as corn or cattle to a farmer, or goods to any other trader. Hence, the author of this dialogue showed that personal qualities in the form of labor are wealth. Modern economists include personal qualities under the term wealth. It has been seen that the economists expressly excluded personal qualities from the term wealth. But as we have shown in the introduction that Adam Smith extended the science of economics by including personal qualities as wealth, in accordance with the doctrine of the author of the Aristotle, and in contradiction to his friends, the economists. Under the terms fixed capital, Smith enumerates the acquired and useful abilities of all the inhabitants or members of the society. The acquisition of such talents by the maintenance of the acquirer during his education, study, or apprenticeship always costs a real expense, which is the capital fixed and realized, as it were, in his person. The talents, as they make part of his fortune, do so they likewise that of the society to which he belongs. So he says, the property which every man has in his own labor, as it is the original foundation of all other property, so it is the most sacred and inviolable. The patrimony of a poor man lies in the strength and dexterity of his hands. J.B. Say dwelt with emphatic force on the doctrine that personal qualities are wealth. Among many other passages, he says, he who has acquired a talent at the price of an annual sacrifice enjoys an accumulated capital, and this wealth, though immaterial, is nevertheless so little fictitious that he daily exchanges the exercise for his art of gold and silver. Since it has been proved that immaterial property, such as talents and acquired personal abilities, form an integral part of social wealth, you see that utility, under whatever form it presents itself, is the source of the value of things. And what may surprise you is that this utility can be created and can have value and become the subject of an exchange without being incorporated in any material object. A manufacturer of glass places value in sand. A manufacturer of cloth places it in wool. But a physician sells us a utility without being incorporated in any manner. This utility is truly the fruit of his studies, his labor, and his capital. We buy it in buying his opinion. It is a real product, but immaterial. Say calls all species of labor and services immaterial wealth because they are vendible products or commodities, but not embodied in any matter. This is an excellent name, and we shall adopt it to exchange this order of economic qualities for material things and abstract rights. Senior has a long and eloquent passage to the same purpose. If the question whether personal qualities are articles of wealth had been proposed in classical times, it would have appeared too clear for discussion. We have already seen that the question was discussed in classical times. In Athens, everyone would have replied that they, in fact, constituted the whole value of insert Greek word. The only differences in this respect between a free man and a slave are, first, that the free man sells himself and only for a period, and to a certain extent, the slave may be sold by others, and secondly, that the personal qualities of the slave are a portion of the wealth of his master. Those of the freeman, so far as they can be made the subject of exchange, are part of his own wealth. They perish, indeed, by his death, and may be impaired or destroyed by disease, or rendered valueless by any change in the custom of the country, which shall destroy the demands for his services. But subject to these contingencies, They are wealth, and wealth of the most valuable kind. The amount of revenue derived from their exercise in England far exceeds the rental of all the lands in Great Britain. And so, even in our present state of civilization, which high, as it appears by comparison, is far short of what may be easily conceived, or even of what may be confidently expected, the intellectual and moral capital of Great Britain far exceeds all the material capital. Not only in importance, but in productiveness. The families that receive mere wages probably do not form a fourth part of the community, and the comparatively larger amount of the wages, even of those, is principally owing to the capital and skill with which their efforts are assisted and directed by the more educated members of the society. These who receive mere rent, even using that word in its largest sense, are still fewer, and the amount of rent, like that of wages, principally depends on the knowledge by which the gifts of nature are directed and employed. The bulk of the national revenue is profit, and of that profit, the portion which is merely interest on material capital, probably does not amount to 1/3. The rest is the result of personal capital, or in other words, of education. It is not in the accidents of the soil, in the climate, in the existing accumulation of the instruments of production, but in the quantity and diffusion of this immaterial capital that the wealth of a country depends. The capital, the soil, and the situation of Ireland have been described as superior, and certainly not much inferior to our own. Her poverty has been attributed to the want of material capital. But were Ireland now to exchange her native population for 7 millions of our English North countrymen, they would quickly create the capital that is wanted. And were England north of the Trent to be peopled exclusively by 1 million of families to the west of Ireland, Lancashire and Yorkshire would still more rapidly resemble Connaught. Ireland is physically poor because she is morally and intellectually poor. And while she continues uneducated, while the ignorance and the violence of her population renders persons and property insecure and prevent the accumulation and prohibit the introduction of capital, legislative measures intended solely and directly to relieve her poverty may not indeed be ineffectual, for they may aggravate the disease, the symptoms of which they are meant to palliate, but undoubtedly will be productive of no permanent benefit. Knowledge has been called power. It is far more certainly wealth. Asia Minor, Syria, Egypt, and the northern coast of Africa were once among the richest and are now among the most miserable countries in the world, simply because they have fallen into the hands of a people without a sufficiency of the immaterial sources of wealth to keep up the material ones. So Mill says, the skill and the energy of the perseverance of the artisans of a country are reckoned part of its wealth no less than its tools and machinery. And why not the skill and energy and perseverance of other classes as well as of artisans? He also says acquired capacities, which exist only as a means and have been called into existence by labor, fall exactly, as it seems to me, within that designation. So Madame Campan inscribed over the hall of study in her establishment at Saint Germain, talents are the ornaments of the rich and the wealth of the poor. We have then already found two distinct kinds of things which can be bought and sold, or whose value can be measured in money. Material things which can be seen and handled, such as money, cattle, corn, etc., and two, things which can neither be seen nor handled, but which can be bought and sold. And though these two kinds of things have nothing in common except the capability of being bought and sold, they are each, for that reason, comprehended under the term wealth. Demosthenes skews that personal credit is wealth, but personal qualities may be used as purchasing power in another method besides that of labor. If a merchant enjoys good credit, as it is termed, he may go into the market and buy goods, not with money, but by giving his promise to pay money at a future time for them. That is, he creates a right of action against himself. The goods become his property exactly as if he had paid for them in money. It is a sale or an exchange. The right of action is the price he pays for them, and the right of action is termed credit. In French, a créance, because it is not a right to any specific sum of money, but only a general right against the person of the merchant to demand a sum of money at a future time. Hence, a merchant's credit is purchasing power exactly as money is. When a merchant purchases goods with his credit instead of with money, his credit is valued in money because the seller of the goods accepts his credit as equal in value to money. His credit is valued in money exactly as his labor may be. Hence, by Aristotle's definition of wealth, which is now universally accepted, the merchant's personal credit is wealth. So, Demosthenes says, against Liptines, 484,20, there being two kinds of property, or goods and chattels, money and general credit, our greatest property is credit, which we have. See also for Formonian, 958. If you were ignorant of this, that credit is the greatest capital of all towards the acquisition of wealth, you would be utterly ignorant. Thus, Demosthenes shows that personal credit is, insert Greek word, or goods and chattels or property, and, insert Greek word, or capital. Thus, though credit, like labor, can neither be seen nor handled nor touched, yet it can be bought and sold or exchanged. Its value can be measured in money. It is purchasing power, and therefore it is wealth. And as we have seen that Adam Smith declares that a man's labor is his most sacred possession, of which no person has the right to despoil him. So to all bankers, merchants, traders, their credit is their most sacred possession, of which no one has the right falsely to despoil them. Hence, the personal credit of all bankers, merchants, and traders is an integral and colossal portion of the national wealth, just as the industrious faculties of working men are. So also the credit of the state, by which it can purchase money or other things, by giving persons the right to demand a series of future payments from it, is national wealth. Modern economists include personal credit under the term wealth. 9. It has been shown that the economists steadfastly refuse to admit that personal credit is wealth, because they alleged that to allow that, it would be to maintain that wealth can be created out of nothing. But contemporary general and mercantile writers were entirely against them on that point. The first writer in modern times that we are aware of who perceived the truth of the doctrine of Demosthenes that personal credit is wealth was that acute metaphysician Bishop Berkeley, who has many searching questions on economics in his Querist. He asks, question 35, whether power to command the industry to others, i.e. credit, be not real wealth. So Mellon says, since there has been a regular commerce among men, those who have need of money have made bills or promises to pay money. The first use of credit, therefore, is to represent money by paper. The usage is very old. The first want gave rise to it. It multiplies specie considerably. It supplies it where it is wanting, and which would never be sufficient without the credit. Because there is not sufficient gold and silver to circulate all the products of nature and art, so there is in commerce a much larger amount of bills than there is in specie in the possession of the merchants. A well-managed credit amounts to tenfold the funds of a merchant, and he gains as much by his credit as if he had 10 times as much money. This maxim is generally received among all merchants. Credit is therefore the greatest wealth of everyone who carries on commerce. So Smith says, trade can be extended as stock increases, and the credit of a frugal and thriving man increases much faster than his stock. His trade is extended in proportion to the amount of both, i.e. his stock and his credit, and the sum or amount of his profits is in proportion to the extent of his trade, and his annual accumulation in proportion to his profits. So Junius says, private credit is wealth. Franklin says, credit is money. Smith expressly includes natural and acquired abilities under the fixed term capital, Now, mercantile character or personal credit evidently comes under the designation of natural and acquired abilities. Hence, personal credit is comprised. Hence, personal credit is comprised under Smith's term capital. No person has more explicitly declared that personal credit is wealth than Mill. In his preliminary remarks, he says, everything, therefore, forms a part of wealth, which has a power of purchasing. He then says, Book 3, Chapter 11, Section 3, for credit, though it is not productive power, is purchasing power. The credit, which we are now called upon to consider as a distinct purchasing power. See also Book 3, Chapter 12, Section 3. The amount of purchasing power which a person can exercise is comprised of all the money in his possession or due to him, i.e., bank notes, bills, and credits he uses, and of all his credit. Due, Section 4. Credit, in short, has exactly the same purchasing power with money, and many other passages to the same effect. Now, if Mill lays down as the fundamental definition of wealth, everything that is purchasing power is wealth, and he says credit is purchasing power, then the necessary inference is that credit is wealth. That is a syllogism in which Mill is safely padlocked and from which there is no escape. Hosts of passages from other writers might be cited if necessary, but that would be wholly superfluous, because an argument is to be judged of by its own intrinsic force and not by the number of persons who assert it. The simple statement of the case is this: ancient writers unanimously held, and modern economists have, at last, come to agree with them, that the only true definition of wealth is anything that can be bought or sold, anything whose value can be measured in money, anything which has purchasing power. Now, as personal credit can be valued in money and is purchasing power, it necessarily follows that personal credit is wealth on abstract rights as wealth. But there is another, there is yet another or a third order of quantities, which can be bought and sold or exchanged, and whose value can be measured in money. And these are abstract rights of various kinds, rights and rights of action. Suppose that a customer pays in a sum of money to his account at his banker's. And what becomes of that money? It becomes the absolute property of the banker. The customer cedes the absolute property in the money to the banker, but he does not make him a present of it. He gets something in exchange for it. And what is that something? In exchange for the money, the banker gives his customer a credit in his books, which is a right of action to demand back an equivalent sum of money he pleases. The transaction is a sale or an exchange. The banker buys the money from his customer by issuing in exchange for it a right of action, and the customer buys this right of action with gold. Furthermore, the banker agrees that his customer may transfer this right of action to anyone else he pleases by means of a check or bank note. So this right of action may pass through any number of hands and affect any number of exchanges until the holder of it demands payment of it, and it is extinguished. When the holder of the check demands payment of it from the banker buys up the right of action against himself with gold, and the holder of the check sells his right of action for gold. The transaction is therefore a sale or an exchange and an act of commerce. Hence, the whole series of these transactions are sales or exchanges. When the customer pays in money to his account, it is an exchange. When he pays away his check in commerce, it is an exchange. And every time the check is transferred, it is an exchange. And when finally payment of it is demanded from the banker, it is an exchange. They are all acts of commerce. This right of action is termed a credit because anyone who chooses to take it in exchange for goods or services knows that it is not a title to any specific sum of money in the banker's possession, but it is only an abstract right of action against the banker himself to demand a sum of money from him. And the person who takes it only does so because he has the belief or confidence that the banker can pay it when required. The banker can pay it when required. It will be convenient to state here that this right of action is also called a debt, and that both in law and common usage, the words credit and debt are used perfectly indiscriminately to mean a creditor's right of action against his debtor. The reason of this will be explained in a subsequent section. Similarly, when a merchant sells goods on credit, as it is termed to a trader, he cedes the property of the goods to the trader exactly as if he had sold them for money. And in exchange for the goods, the trader gives the merchant his promise to pay, or a right of action to demand the money at a future time, say 3 months after date. This right of action is also termed a credit or a debt. It is the price a trader pays for the goods, and if it be recorded on paper in the form of a bill of exchange, it may be exchanged against other goods and circulate in commerce exactly like a sum of money until it is paid off and exchanged. Again, suppose that the state wants to borrow a sum of money for some public purpose, such as a war, or for some great public work. It buys money from those who are willing to sell it and gives them in exchange for the money the right to demand a series of payments from the state, either forever or for a certain limited time. The right to demand a series of future payments termed an annuity and is the price the state pays for the money. In popular language, they are termed the funds, and the owners of these rights may sell them again to anyone else they please. They are saleable commodities. Suppose again that a person subscribes to the capital of a joint stock company of any sort, banking, insurance, railway, canal, dock, or any other. He pays the money to the company, which is a distinct person, and receives in exchange for it the right to share in the future profits of the company. These rights are termed shares, and they are also saleable commodities, which may be bought and sold by any material chattels. So, when a trader has established a successful business, he has the right to receive the future payments to be made by the business. This right to receive the future profits is a property quite distinct and separate from and additional to the house or to the shop and the actual goods in them. It is the product of labor, thought, and care, as much as any material chattels, and is a part of the trader's assets. It is termed the goodwill of the business and is a saleable commodity. Throughout, the great brewer appointed Johnson one of his executors. In that capacity, it became his duty to sell the business. When the sale was going on, Johnson appeared bustling about with an inkhorn and a pen in his buttonhole, like an exciseman, and on being asked what he really considered to be the value of the property, which was to be disposed of, answered, "We are not here to sell a parcel of boilers and vats, but the potentiality of growing rich beyond the dreams of avarice." This latter phrase was merely Johnsonist for the goodwill of the business. The price realized was, we are told elsewhere, £135,000. When the banking house of Jones, Lloyd and Company sold their business to the London and Westminster Bank, it was said in the papers that the price paid was £500,000. Thus, the goodwill of any business is a saleable commodity. So, when an author has published a successful work, the right to the profits to be made by multiplying copies of it is a valuable right, which may be bought and sold like any material chattel, quite separate from the printed copies of the work. This right is termed copyright and is a saleable commodity. So when a professional man has established a successful business, the right of receiving the future profits of the business is a valuable property, which may be bought and sold. This property is termed a practice. It is a saleable commodity. So there are many other kinds of property which consist exclusively in abstract rights, such as patents, tithes, tolls, shootings, etc., which we need not enumerate at greater length, because our object is to describe a particular order of quantities and not to enumerate them all. Now, these abstract rights cannot be seen, nor handled, nor touched, but they can be bought and sold or exchanged. Their value can be measured in money. They can be transferred from one person to another as easily as any material chattels, and therefore they satisfy Aristotle's definition of wealth. They all possess that quality of exchangeability which ancient writers unanimously, and modern writers now at last agree, is the sole essence and principle of wealth, and therefore, by the fundamental laws of natural philosophy, these abstract rights are all wealth. General rule of Roman law that rights are wealth. 11. Now, in the Pandects of Justinian, which are the great code or digest of Roman law, it is laid down as a fundamental general rule. Under the term wealth, not only ready money, but all things, both immovable and movable, both corporal things and rights are included. So the eminent Roman jurist Ulpian says, "We are accustomed to buy and sell debts, payable at a certain event and on a certain day, for that is wealth which can be bought and sold." And also it is said, rights of action are properly reckoned as goods. Also, under the term property, both rights and rights of action are included. So Sir Patrick Colquhoun, in his summary of Roman law, says, the first requisite of the consensual contract of emptio el venditio is a merx, or an object to be transferred from the buyer to the seller. And the first requirement is that it should be in commercio, that is, capable of being freely bought and sold. Supposing such to be the case, it matters not whether it is an immovable or immovable, corporal or incorporeal, existent or non-existent, certain or uncertain, the property of the vendor or another, thus a horse or a right of action, servitude or thing to be acquired, or the acquisition whereof depends on chance. A purchaser may buy of a farmer the future crop of a certain field. Wine, which may grow the next year on a certain vineyard, may be bought at so much a price, at so much a pipe, or a certain price may be paid irrespective of quantity or quality, and the price would be due, though nothing grew, or for whatever did grow. In the second case, the bargain is termed emptio spi, and in the first and last, emptio re spirite, of which such bargains are presumed to be in cases of doubt. The cessation of a right of action, it being legal in the Roman law, the right of A to receive a debt due by B may be sold to C. Thus, it is clearly seen that abstract rights of various sorts, including rights of action, which in law, commerce, and economics are termed credits or debts, are expressly included in the terms pecunia, wealth, res, property, bona, goods, and merx, merchandise, in Roman law. General rule of Greek law that rights are wealth. For nearly 500 years after Constantinople removed the seat of government from Rome to Constantinople, the language of the court was Latin, but the people were Greek. Consequently, as the official language was Latin, it was unintelligible to the mass of the people. The great code of Roman law, termed the Pandects, was established in 530 AD, but all the pleadings in the courts were carried on in Greek. The Latin Pandects soon fell into destitute. They were superseded by Greek treatises, translations, and compilations. The Latin institutes of Justinian did not hold their place in the curriculum of legal education for more than 10 years. They were superseded by the paraphrase of Theophilus, one of the professors of law, who were charged with the compilation of the institutes. And this paraphrase became the textbook for the education of law students throughout the Eastern Empire. At last, in the 9th and 10th centuries, under the Basilian dynasty, All the Pandects, institutes, and legislation of Justinian were set aside as obsolete. A reformed digest or code was published in Greek, which was called the Basilica, and this, henceforth, became the law of the Eastern Empire, and has remained to the present time as the common law of all the Greek population in the East, and is the common law of the modern kingdom of Hellas. And the Roman definition of wealth is adopted and confirmed. Under the term, insert Greek word, or wealth, rights are included. Also, Basil, too, under the term, insert Greek word, chattels, rights, and rights of action are included. Thus, it is seen that by express enactment in Greek law, the words, insert Greek words, include rights and rights of action of all sorts. These rights are also included under the terms, insert Greek word, goods, estate, capital, wealth. They are termed invisible wealth. And these words include all the three orders of economic quantities. General rule of English law that rights are wealth. It is exactly the same in English law. Abstract rights or property are included under the terms goods, goods and chattels, merchandise, vendible commodities, incorporeal chattels, and incorporeal wealth in English law. A chattel means any property of any sort which is not freehold. Thus, Shepard says, all kinds of implements sown and growing, grass cut, all money, plate, jewels, utensils, household stuffs, debts, wood cut, wares in a shop, tools and instruments for work, wares, merchandise, carts, plows, coaches, saddles, and the like, all kinds of cattle, as horses, oxen, kin, bullocks, goats, sheep, pigs, and all tame fowl, swans, turkeys, geese, capons, hens, ducks, poultry, and the like, are accounted as chattels. All obligations, bills, statutes, recognizances, judgments shall be a chattel in the executor. All right of action to a personal chattel is a chattel. So in the case of Ford, 12 Company 1, or 12 Column 1, it was resolved by Popham, Chief Justice of England and the court, that personal actions are as well included within the word goods in an act of parliament as goods in possession. So in Rial versus Rolls, Lord Chancellor Hardwicke said the chattels are the debts, i.e. rights of action, due and to be due, and debts come within the words and meanings of the act and would pass in a will thereby. Burnett J. said, a debt bond is certainly a chattel. The conclusive case is Ford's case, 12, Column 1, that personal actions are included in the words goods in an act of parliament as goods in possession. Parker, LCB, said, but goods and chattels include debts, rights of action. Goods and chattels comprehend things in action in the construction of any act of parliament. Lee, CJ, said, the inquiry is whether choses in action are not included under goods and chattels. And I agree, choses in action will be included therein. So Blackstone says, for it is to be understood that in our law, chattels or goods and chattels is a term used to express any property which, having regard either to subject matter or quantity of interest therein, is not freehold. Property or chattels personal may be either in possession or in action. Property in action is where a man has not the enjoyment, either active or constructive, of the thing in question, but merely a right to receive it by a suit or action at law. So Mr. J. Williams says, personal estate is divided in English law into chattels real and chattels personal. The latter are divided into choses in possession and choses in action. This work deals exclusively with rights of action, and therefore we shall henceforth confine our attention to them. Rights of action, then, being now shown to be goods and chattels, it is absolutely necessary to observe that it is the abstract right of action itself, which is the goods and chattels, and not any material on which it may be written down. Rights of action may be bought and sold with perfect futility, even in the abstract state. But it is very common to write them down on paper in the form of banknotes, checks, bills of exchange, and other instruments. By doing this, they become capable of manual delivery and are transferable from hand to hand like money or any other material chattel. Abstract rights of action are incorporeal chattels, but when written down on paper, they become strictly corporeal chattels or material commodities, exactly like money. Hence, the reader must observe that writing a right of action down on paper in no way alters its nature. Doing so is merely a convenient form of rendering it capable of being transferred in commerce, but it is exactly the same nature and effect whether written down on paper or not. Modern economists include rights of action, i.e. credits or debts, under the term circulating capital. 14. It has been shown that the economists steadfastly refuse to admit credits, i.e. rights of action, to be wealth. But it has been shown in the introduction that Smith expressly classes banknotes and bills of exchange under the terms circulating capital. Hence, Smith expressly recognizes the existence of the three orders of exchangeable quantities. Thus, Smith expressly includes money under the term circulating capital. And under the term money, he includes banknotes, bills of exchange, etc., which he calls paper money, which term is not quite correct because though banknotes and bills of exchange may be, under certain circumstances, money, as will be seen further on, still they are not absolutely money, but they are all included under the term paper currency. Among several passages, it will be sufficient to quote one here. Suppose that different banks and bankers issue promissory notes payable to bearer on demand to the extent of 1 million, reserving in their different coffers 200,000 pounds for answering occasional demands. There would remain, therefore, in circulation 800,000 in gold and silver and 1 million pounds in banknotes, or 1.8 million pounds of paper and money together. He also observes that credits in the Bank of Amsterdam are called bank money. Thus, we see that Smith, in this and numerous other passages, places paper credit exactly on the same footing as independent property and of the same value as gold and silver. So J.B. says the exclusive possession, which in the midst of society clearly distinguishes the property of one person from that of another in common usage, is that to which the title of wealth is given. Under this title are included not only things which are differently capable of satisfying the wants of man, either natural or social, but the things which can satisfy them only indirectly, such as money, instruments of credit, and public funds. Thus, expressly includes instruments of credit and the funds, which are mere rights of action under the term wealth. And he also includes bills of exchange, banknotes, and bank credits under the term capital. Thus, he says that if a bank can maintain in circulation a greater quantity of notes than it retains specie in reserve, it augments by so much the capital of the country. So he also says we must include under capital many objects which have a value, although they are not material. The practice of an advocate or notary, the custom of a shop, the representation of a signboard, the title of a periodical work are undoubtedly property biens. They may be bought and sold and be the subject of a contract, and they are also capital because they are the fruit of accumulated labor. So Mill says an order or note of hand or bill payable at sight for an ounce of gold, which is credit, while the credit of the giver is unimpaired, is worth neither more nor less than the gold itself. So also we have now found that there are other things such as banknotes, bills of exchange, and checks, which are credit, which circulate as money and perform all the functions of it. He also designates banknotes as productive capital. Whately is the only English economist that we are aware of who has called special attention to incorporeal property. He says, the only difficulty I can foresee as attendant on the language I have now been using is one which, i.e., defining political economy as the science of exchanges, vanishes so readily on a moment's reflection as to be hardly worth mentioning. In many cases where an exchange really takes place, the fact is liable, till the attention is called to it, to be overlooked, in consequence of our not seeing any actual transfer from hand to hand of a material object. For instance, when the copyright of a book is sold to a publisher, the article transferred is not the mere paper covered with writing, but the exclusive privilege of printing and publishing. It is plain, however, on a moment's thought, that the transaction is as real an exchange as that which takes place between the bookseller and his customers, who buy copies of the book. The payment of rent for land is a transaction of a similar kind, for, though the land itself is a material object, it is not this that is parted with to the tenant, but the right to till it, or to make use of it in some other specified manner. Sometimes, for instance, rent is paid for a right of way through another's field, or for liberty to erect a booth during a fair, or to race or exercise horses. And Whately says in a note to this passage, this instance, by the way, evinces the impropriety of limiting the term wealth to material objects. Thus, in this passage is found the first dim perception that all exchanges consist in the exchange of rights against rights, as will be shown further on. We need not multiply quotations. In fact, those we have already given are chiefly for the benefit of lay readers, because it is one of the most elementary principles of mercantile law, clearly explained and enforced by every jurist in the world, that a simple abstract right of action, or credit or debt, or other abstract rights with which we are not concerned in this work, is included under the terms pecunia, res, bona, merx, etc. Goods, chattels, vendible commodities, incorporeal chattels, incorporeal wealth, and that a right of action can be bought and sold or exchanged. Its value can be measured in money. In every respect, like any material chattel, there is no such thing as absolute wealth. 15. The preceding considerations show that there is no such thing as absolute wealth. That is, there is nothing which is in its own nature, in all circumstances, in all times, and in all places wealth. The sole essence and principle of wealth is exchangeability. For anything to be exchangeable, it is necessary that someone else should demand it. It is therefore solely human wants and desires, and the capacity to give something to obtain it, that constitutes anything wealth. Things are only wealth in those places and in those times where and when they are wanted, demanded, and paid for. And consequently, they cease to be wealth when they cease to be wanted and demanded. Therefore, the very same things may be wealth in some places and not in others, and at some times and not at others, and become wealth more or less, as the demand for them increases or decreases. Hence, the amount of wealth in any country at any given time is simply the mass of exchangeable quantities in it. Economics or commerce consists of 6 distinct kinds of exchange. 16. It has now been shown that for 1,300 years, ancient writers unanimously held that exchangeability is the sole essence and principle of wealth, that anything, whatever which possesses the principle or quality of exchangeability, everything, whatever which can be bought and sold or exchanged, or whose value can be measured in money, is wealth, no matter what its form or its nature may be. The ancients also showed that there are 3 distinct orders of quantities which possess the quality of exchangeability, or whose value can be measured in money, namely material things, personal qualities, both in the form of labor and credit, and 3 abstract rights. And reflection will show that there is nothing which can be bought or sold which is not one of these three forms. Either it is a material thing, or it is a personal service or quality, or it is an abstract right. Hence, as it is positively known that there is nothing which possesses the quality of exchangeability, or whose value can be measured in money, beyond these three orders of quantities, the science is now complete. Now, if all material things be symbolized by the word money, and if all personal services be symbolized by the word labor, and if all abstract rights be symbolized by the word credit, these three distinct orders of economic quantities may be symbolized by the words money, labor, and credit. And all commerce in its widest extent and in all its forms and varieties, that is the science of pure economics, consists in the exchanges of these three orders of quantities. There being then three and only three distinct orders of exchangeable quantities, it is evident that there may be combined two in 6 different ways. These 6 different kinds of exchanges are: 1, a material thing for a material thing, as when gold money is exchanged for lands, houses, corn, jewelry, timber, cattle, etc. 2, a material thing for labor, as when gold money is paid as wages, fees, and salary for any service done. 3, a material thing for a right, as when gold money is given to purchase bills of exchange, the funds, copyrights, patents, shares of commercial companies, or any other valuable right. 4, labor for labor, as when persons agree to perform reciprocal services for each other. 5, labor for a right, as when wages, fees, salaries, or any service done is paid for in bank notes, checks, bills of exchange, etc. 6, a right for a right, as when a banker buys one right of action, such as a bill of exchange, and gives in exchange for it a credit in his books, which is another right of action. The economists only admitted material products to be wealth and only treated one species of exchange, and that of products for products. Bessarion admitted that services are wealth and said that all exchanges consisted of the exchanges of products for products, products for services, and services for services, thereby admitting 3 kinds of exchanges. But as a matter of fact, exchangeable or economic quantities consists of 3 orders of quantities, and hence there are 6 distinct kinds of exchange. But the present work only deals with the commerce and rights of action, i.e., credits or debts.